Right. Well, welcome everyone this afternoon. This afternoon in the UK and whatever time it is, wherever you are. Very, very nice to have you all with us again for our latest webinar. In fact, the last one of the year, entitled "What You Need to Know to Build the Perfect Digital Learning Academy." I'm joined by Nick Price, one of my colleagues, and I'll let him introduce himself in a short while. A couple of housekeeping issues, questions, things to say. One of those is we will be asking a few questions in poll form during the webinar. You'll see those come up on screen. You're very, very welcome indeed, encouraged to ask questions as we go along. Nick and I will be watching and we'll try and pick out questions and answer them. If we don't get to them immediately, we will try and get to them during the webinar at certain points. We'll also be picking up on any questions at the end of the session, and indeed we're going to stay behind in what we call a green room moment for 10-15 minutes after the webinar's finished to address any questions that remain for anybody who sticks with us after that. We have Harley in the background, who's our producer today, and he can also answer any questions you have, technical or otherwise. So fire those to him in either chat or he'll probably pick them up in questions as well. So without any more hesitation, I will move on, and we will get going with a topic that has been very much at the front of our minds recently, and so we thought it was something we ought to talk about, because it sort of brings up and covers a lot of areas of just general digital best practice, and we've had a lot of clients asking us about academies recently. My name's Andrew Jolly. I'm Director of Strategic Design here at Leo, so I lead the faculty, if you like, of consultants and strategists across Leo. My quote is that we learn fastest when we're dropped in the metaphorical deep end. This is something very much that I think we've all been feeling in the last few months. It's been an extraordinary time. It's very, very difficult to find any silver linings at a time like this, but I would say if there is one, it is that we've seen a lot of innovation and a lot of experimentation, and that's always a good thing. And I think it's at times like this that we do discover new things and try out new things, and very often it gives us a real boost. And it's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Nick.
So hi, I'm Nick Price. I'm a learning design consultant here at Leo. I've been doing this for about 12 years. And prior to that, I was in the classroom teaching secondary science. So I kind of work across a very diverse range of clients, from the very serious to the quite whimsical, and on projects big and small. So the quote I chose was from Steve Jobs, which is odd because I don't own anything from Apple at all, but it was a good quote. Learn continually, there's always one more thing to learn, and I think that is true just in all aspects. And what I like about my job is going into organizations, and just the more you dig, the more you find out, and the more you encounter people who are just expert in what they do, and there is always more to learn.
Thanks, Nick. So many of you will know us. We are very lucky, as both of us in Leo, to be part of the Learning Technologies Group, which is a growing family of organizations, all within digital learning enablement, if you like. You may well recognize some of these brands and products. Too many now to go through when I start one of these webinars, except to say that amongst the brands and the teams spread throughout the world, represented here. You'll see two very important learning management system / platforms in the form of PeopleFluent and OpenLMS. You'll see Gomo, an authoring tool, world-class authoring tool, very close colleagues of ours. You'll see Watershed and Rustici, and they are leaders in analytics, data, and integration of learning data and delivery of tools, integrated tools. Instilled, a learning experience platform that we've talked about in the past, and in and amongst those are two closer colleagues in the service area, Preloaded, who are a serious games team based in London, and Leo GRC, our governance, risk and compliance specialist team within Leo. So as Leo, we're in a unique and great position to learn from our colleagues, to work closely with them from the other teams, and increasingly be working with them for single clients in multiple teams working on the same end goal, which is something that we learn from, as Nick says, every day. Today we're going to be talking about academies, and we're going to cover briefly what we mean by an academy for the sake of this discussion. We've distilled everything we know into top 5 tips that we can talk to you about for a successful digital learning academy, and 4 key risks that came out of that we'll come to towards the end, a little bit of a summary and some questions as well. So I urge you again to fire your questions at us in the questions pane during the webinar so that we can answer them as we go along. We've got a number of you on the call on the webinar. It's very difficult to make it fully informal, but we will do everything we can to get to your questions and answer them. We want to start with a question of our own, and that is to understand you to some extent, and what your how you come to be here really today. So the question really is, learning academies, what's your interest, what's your involvement? So Harley, if you can pull up that poll question, and we'd just like to very quickly know which of these you are. You're involved in an existing learning academy, perhaps. You're interested in developing one. You are just browsing, or perhaps you're not even sure what we're talking about. And do choose one of those. Let's see what we got. Got a good lot of votes now. Nearly hit 80%. If you'd like to bring up the results, Harley, that'd be great. So that's really interesting. Thank you everyone for doing that. So we can see that almost an equal number of you are actually involved in an existing learning academy and or are interested in developing one. And a few of you browsing, and a few of you don't know what I'm talking about or Nick's talking about, and hopefully we can sort that out for a start. This is really interesting because we've noticed a lot of interest in academies recently, as I said, and I would say that number of 38% interested in developing an academy is higher than I have ever seen. Maybe if we get a chance, I'm going to ask you later. I'm going to ask everybody to tell me why, but for the time being, we'll move on. We wanted to talk a little bit about what makes a digital learning academy, i.e., what are we talking about? And you could call it a campus, a portal, a gateway, a hub. Academy seems to be one of the more generic terms. And so we're going to stick with that for now. The other thing I'd say is that we will naturally move to the place we know best, which is corporate digital learning academies today. But that is not to say that a lot of what we're going to be talking about wouldn't apply in other contexts, certainly sort of educational digital academies, or anything in between, if you like. But some of the examples we're going to be giving will be corporate, which is the area that Leo work in traditionally more. So Nick, what are academies typically?
And this is a good point to raise, is that we're working on a variety of things that call themselves academies. What we're going to talk about today are what we observe in those things that are created, and we're really looking for patterns. So, I mean, this list is interesting because it starts by saying a learning space, portal, or gateway. Certainly those are features that it has. Maybe it's a bit more than that. Focused around a specific initiative or strategic need is definitely a common factor. With executive sponsorship is almost always the case, and high profile, similarly, they almost always have quite a big launch. They deliver multiple programs and learning pathways. They don't tend to be a single program, and they're multimodal, so it won't just be an e-learning platform or a video platform. It will be a whole variety of things. Andrew?
Yes, sorry. Typically, these days, a learning academy might also include external content. It's curated, so the content will not necessarily be derived in one team or one place, or indeed one faculty. Faculty is critical to an academy nowadays. In the past, we might have seen sort of content just authored and put up to a place, but we're seeing that less and less. These days you'd see faculty driven, and we're going to talk about that in a second. It might be accreditation, certification within the faculty, within the academy. More recently, there would have been very likely a move to sort of community driven approach, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. You might have seen academies refocused on sort of self-directed learning, learning in the flow of work, informal learning, providing that that kind of place where learning happens, not just formal courses, which is what we would have seen in the past. And a phrase we're hearing a lot is capability academies. We'll talk about that as well in terms of what the academy is I suppose, doing for a business or a cohort of learners. These are the kinds of academies we've worked on in relatively recent past. So we have worked on many leadership academies, sales academies, customer experience for a finance client, products, particularly, for instance, around retirement. Products and sales. We see things like future skills academies, which are focusing on capabilities for a business in the future. Many of these you will recognize. I won't go through the whole list, but onboarding, a group of onboarding assets pulled together, we've seen referred to as perhaps a foundation academy or foundation learning academy. And they can be sometimes very specialist around a particular sort of area of practice, like systems integration in an engineering context at the bottom there. If you have any more that you'd like to add into the questions panel, those 37% of you that actually are working with academies, then please type them in, and Nick and I can read them out in a short while. So do feel free to type into your questions panel academies we've missed. one of the main kind of academy programs that Nick and I worked on some years back now, but remains very, very influential in our thinking, was the NHS Leadership Academy, which was 5 key, very large courses, if you like, or programs within the UK's National Health Service to drive leadership in a healthcare context. Another example is the Retirements Product Academy from one of our clients in a finance context. So this is really around sales and product knowledge, and even sort of technical academies like oil essentials or lubricants, for instance, from one of our oil energy clients. So these are the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to be discussing with you. And we'll move straight on to 5 important things that you need to know to create a successful learning academy. And over to you, Nick, with our first.
Take it away. So our number 1 tip is to define the purpose, build and manage for the future. And I think this is based off seeing different things that have you know, either succeeded or sunk or faded away. And the difference, the thing that marks out the ones that succeed, tends to be, it's the academies that have a really clear purpose, that really manage to differentiate themselves. So we're going to actually pop along to a bad example. If we pop down, if me and Andrew were to start an academy and call it Andrew and Nick's Knowledge Academy, we've slightly fallen at the first hurdle here. We've really defined ourselves much too broadly. Andrew?
Yep.
So a Knowledge Academy is a very broad definition, and you could easily find that you become the go-to place, and you might even end up competing with other systems within the organization. Now, equally, we could go for a Learning Videos Academy. Andrew's a slide ahead of us here. If we went for learning videos, that's quite a narrow focus, and this is another place that you can fall down in defining your purpose. If you go too narrow, then you've kind of lost your scope, and you've lost your strategic alignment, because learning videos might be a priority 1 year, and then things might move on, and in a following year, you know, you've become a strategic irrelevance, and you're going to be, you know, just cut or amalgamated, you know, but you'll eventually disappear. So what we aim for with an academy, what you should aim for, is a scope that's really small enough that it's going to focus people and they'll know what to expect when they come there. So a design academy is quite a good title, particularly for what we do. People know what to come, but also there's good bounds there between what isn't in scope, what doesn't belong there, and that's important, because you don't want to tread on other people's toes, and you want people who come to your academy to have a clear idea of what they're going to get when they get there. But obviously a title only gets you so far in sticking to your purpose. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew.
So yes, as Nick says, you can define the purpose, and that can be part of your kind of brand and your the way you market yourself to your learners. But the next most important thing as part of this sort of setup really is about thinking about the future, because your academy is for training people in your organization in the future, not today and not in the past. So first of all, you want to include all key stakeholders in your governance structure and make sure that they are present at the table, if you like, as you think about what your academy is doing and how it's going to change and how it's going to grow. You're going to be responsible, amongst all other things, critically for a level of standards and quality. And when it comes to delivering blends, curated content coming from different vendors, different SMEs within your organization, different faculty, that could be one of your key and absolute roles, is to is to work on maintaining that and delivering guidelines and so on. You may well be wanting to think about brand as well, and particularly relating to curated, internally generated content, because that is going to have an effect on how people perceive what your academy is all about. And we're working with a big technology partner to develop if you like, an onboarding academy. And so these are some of the slides that we're using to look at what the brand of the whole academy will be like. Later on, Nick will be talking specifically about the experience and the design. But these are all things that you need to think about. And you do need to think about the future and how your academy is going to evolve. So you need to keep planning to innovate and change over time, not just set up the curriculum and walk away. And critically, as you do that and as you check in over time, you need to be checking in on the value you're offering and the difference that you're making, and build on that and grow in that area, which is an easy thing to say, but something we will come back to in a second as well. Nick, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's a really nice segue actually into point number 2. So our second item is really another fundamental to get right at the beginning, and it's to expect a return, to measure and report. And this really is to differentiate yourself from maybe an LMS, which its purpose is to sit there and hold, but as a whole entity, it probably doesn't have that level of expectation around it. I think with an academy, the big idea is the whole academy is focused on delivering some big picture goal. So with that in mind, we're going to ask the unpopular question, but we would like to know right now how well you think you're measuring your learning. So the poll's up now. So the options here, are you at the top there? Do you measure everything thoroughly all the time? Do you have measurement on most programs, most things you do? Or maybe just measurement something you do on selected programs or courses? Or would you just fairly describe it as little or no measurement? That's interesting. I think there's not many more votes coming in now.
Thanks, Ali.
We have a definite trend showing there. And I would say it's a fair reflection that you've got your 11% there saying they measure thoroughly all the time. I think most organizations really struggle with getting their measurement in all the time, particularly where they launch a course and then that's kind of seen as an end point, and very little time is allocated to the follow-up. Measure most programs, I think, is a fair way of looking at what's delivered, and obviously that's where most people sit, and you'll have your core measures, and most people will have set up a standard of what you expect to measure and make sure that's reported on all of their work. A few only, we know that happens, they measure when they get around to it, but there will be other things that just don't get the attention, and little to none. I can see a significant number of people in that category, and that's also true. I think there are plenty of places where the L&D function really are not given the time or resource to do it, and the value isn't seen. If the value of it isn't seen, then it probably doesn't happen. So we're going to talk about what it means to expect a return, if we can get our presentation back.
I'd say, by the way, the results there are really good compared to when we've asked this question in the past, because we've got nearly 53% saying they measure most programs or all programs, which is really, really good. At the end of this this webinar, I'll be asking people to look at or if they will take part in a survey where we will can benchmark this with measurement surveys we've done over the last 5 years, but we'll come to that later. Sorry, Nick, over to you.
Great. So I'm talking about measurement, and I'm showing you a slide about design, which says requirements drive design. But I think this is an important point to make, that the design that we do, and this has been the way we work since I joined the company, was that what we create is driven by business goals. There was a big picture requirement, and we make sure as designers that we're aware of that, and we have a logical flow from this is the business goal, what is it that people need to do or need to do differently, what do they need to learn, and that's how we define what training is required. The flip side of this then is the series of measurement questions you can ask. You can see it say, did they complete the training? Have they learned what's there? And then in the real world, are people doing what they've learned, and was the goal achieved? Now, this year of all years, we know that there are massive confounding factors that mean that you can do the best training in the world, and people can even adopt all of those behaviors, and a big external event comes along and switches things around. So I'd just like to hone in then on the first two questions. So if we move on the slide. These are often questions that people are a little bit disparaging about. They say they're low-level analysis, and in some ways they are. Completions and assessment results, they are quite low-level ways of thinking about training, that if you only focused on those, you'd be missing the big picture. But what I would like to point out is that if you've done the correct logic in devising your learning, if you follow that learning design process of achieving a business goal, then these measures mean a lot more than if your learning is kind of sitting in isolation and was, just one request for training at some time that led to its creation. And I think those measures in the context of where these requirements came from, and particularly in the context of an academy, which is all hopefully focused on one core purpose, these measures become a lot more relevant and a lot more useful, because you know that each of the things that people are working on in your academy is contributing to that overall goal. That said, if we move on, we always keep our eyes on the prize. We are always interested in whether goals are being achieved, whether people are pursuing the behaviors that we wanted to in the real world. I think it's just having a realistic expectation about whether you're going to find the numbers for that, or whether you're going to be in a year. And that works both ways. You might find that behaviors change and goals are achieved, and you might be slightly over-egging it if you think that your training is the sole driver of that. So you have to have all the levels of measurement in order to draw fair conclusions.
Nick, we have a question, which is, are there any key differences between a measurement strategy in an academy context to a course or a program, perhaps?
That is a really good question. I would say the kind of the mechanisms of it and the type of data, all of that is not significantly different to what you'd be doing in any other place. I think the way the academy helps is the fact that it has all been built around a goal. So hopefully everything in your academy is ultimately pointing towards one business goal or one business area that you're looking to improve. And I think that gives it all focus, and it helps you make more sense of the data, because one of the things we struggle most with is having all of these measurement points off a very diverse range of courses, which could be aiming for very different things, and trying to make those comparisons. Whereas in an academy, hopefully you've got lots of things working in unison towards a single goal.
Thank you. So as an example, I showed and mentioned earlier a retirement academy, retirement products and services and sales academy within a large financial organization. We put in place a measurement ecosystem, if you like, that did a number of things, like, for instance, look at the people's answers to certain questions or assessments within the course. This was looking at how many assets they downloaded, or in which topics assets were downloaded, which gave us an interesting insight to how our audience were engaging with different content areas within the academy. But just to touch on the sort of behavioral shift, one of the really nice things we saw in this was that we had a significant shift in behaviors associated. Within a month of launch, a lot of the 8% of the people undertaking the course had actually made changes to their own pensions and retirement provision. And so we could tell straight away that the academy was serving its purpose and reaching one of its goals. And so that kind of what we call these sort of goal. We often talk about big data measurement as gold mine or landmine, but generally speaking, the fact is that you can see things happening in a lot of different areas if you put in place a good measurement strategy right from the very start. So tip 3 is design your people academy and think about your people critically, because it is not just about the digital content provision anymore. It is about the performance and the shift in your people, and it is about your faculty. We often talk about the perfect learner, and given an academy is a situation where we are trying to drive absolute best practice in learning around a particular area, these kind of behaviors here on the right: engagement, owning learning, connecting with each other, reflecting on their learning, sharing, supporting each other, prioritizing learning over other things, are the kind of behaviors that we'd be looking to drive, and we'd want to be checking are happening within our cohort. Our other key stakeholders, if you like, if not the key stakeholders in terms of administration and driving the offering into our organization, is our governance. We've talked a little bit about them. They're driving, we hope, relevance of the academy into the business at all times, maintaining quality, driving innovation and growth and change, and are responsible for marketing and communicating the way the academy is working and its success stories, and reporting up to the board. Most importantly, we have faculty, and their role is really shifting much more so nowadays. They are responsible for presenting credibility and authority around the topic area, if you like. They are nowadays experts and not just trainers. They're going to have to learn to be digital and virtual learning trainers, but above all other things, they are experts in their area. They are going to be focused on performance and leadership in their topic areas. They are going to be now editors and curators of content, and they're going to be looking at supporting their learners as much as delivering content. This may mean that they need to shift quite a lot in terms of how they behave. They're going to have to understand perhaps new aspects of what they do around measurement, language of measurement, and perhaps become more consultants in terms of learning and change than they had done before. But we would always say focus on faculty very much. In the mix, and an important subset are what we might call champions, because at the end of the day, we're looking to drive our learners' behaviors and knowledge and understanding of what the academy is offering and so on. And the champions are key to that. Whenever we're talking about a marketing or communication strategy, we're looking at who is doing, who are the best practice learners, if you like, and what can we do with them to leverage that engagement. They're going to be leading by example. We can use them to mentor and coach other learners, to build a kind of scaffolding around how people enter into our academy, and to take part in the governance as well, and to challenge what the academy is doing and delivering. So, Nick, over to you. A little bit about the perfect learning experience.
The perfect learning experience, which is an absolutely huge title. I'm afraid we can't give you every aspect of the perfect learning experience, but there's definitely some fundamentals that we can cover that we see across many academies that are out there. Now, a key thing here is that you can make the best content in the world, but it's going to go to waste if you don't get your learners to the content and you don't hook them in. And so I thought I'd start with maybe what we shouldn't do, which is the kind of catalog view that's probably, you know, common as the default homepage on a content management system or on a learning management system. You get the catalog effect, and you have to think about this in terms of the user arriving for the first time. And if they were faced with something like this, I think they would be somewhat overwhelmed. For a returning user, a catalog is not quite such a problem, but for a new user, it's too much, and it doesn't communicate the fact that you're there with a purpose, and also that you're there for them. You're there to help them get from A to B. So what does a good academy look like? I think there are some key features we'll talk about, but you can see even at a glance that we're looking at something that's much more friendly and much more simplified, even though behind it there could be quite a lot of complexity and a huge amount of content. So if we move down, we'll look at some of the features. So, I mean, the first thing is that we need to be using user-friendly language. We need to be talking directly to the user about the fact that the academy is built for them. You know, it's not the equivalent of opening up a file system and seeing folders. They're in a tool that is there to take them on the journey. When you're going to present them with options, it should be a small number of high value options that you're presenting them with. Often in an academy, it will be a series of programs. The other thing that we see more and more of is diagnostics. So personalization right up front. Before giving people a recommendation, you find out who they are, where they've come from. You know, it's 2 or 3 questions that are going to make sure that you can give them 3 very relevant options rather than a screen full of options that they've got to sift through. And finally, tying to this idea of faculty that we had earlier, it's the idea that an academy is something bigger than the catalogue. And so by having news updates on there and input from the faculty on a regular basis, you're communicating that this is a live community. It's not a reference piece, it's a place to come and gain access to experts and access to what is going on and what is current. So we can see some examples of this. Here's a systems integration academy. And you can see a lot of these principles here, drawing people to the 3 top start here, high value items it's going on. But also down the bottom, you can see there's keeping up to date, already making sure that people are absolutely clear that this is a place where there is current events, current news happening. You know, it's not going to be I visit it once and then I never have to come back here type of experience. If we look at what those journeys look like within, what's very, very common within academies is that things are organized into programs and courses. Essentially, that you map out the A to B for them to get learners efficiently through lots and lots of content in a very structured way. you put them out as structured programs, which I suspect you're all quite familiar with. You know, all of the normal things apply here. You want to make sure there's clear milestones, recognition of progress, you know, that level of personalization. People have logged in, so they can be taken to the next thing that they need to do. If we look at some other examples, we're coming back to the NHS Leadership Academy here. And again, this is just one of the programs that you're seeing there, the Elizabeth Garrett Anderson program. There were 5 programs, I think, in total on there. And that's divided into modules, and then within each module, it's set out on a page. And you can see even on the page, lots of clear indicators of progression through. If we move on, we can look at what went into the NHS Leadership Academy. Now, we have to note this is a very large academy. This was, you know, several master's programs were in this academy. And they were also blends, quite complicated blends, with live residential sessions as well as the online learning. So that did lead to 60, you know, plus defined component formats. You know, and when we're talking about format, it means that within the e-learning, we differentiate between a 10-minute and a 30-minute e-learning. We say these are different things used to different purposes, but it's quite an important quality control step to have that ownership of the formats that are going into your academy is a way of controlling the quality and making sure that things meet a standard before they come in, because obviously the last thing you want to do is create an academy where users find that they reach lots of dead ends or lots of content that's valueless and doesn't quite live up to the promise. So I think defining the components is a really important way of doing the blend. And then, yeah, finally, if we look, not all academies are going to be structured into programs. So this academy used a profile and then was much more recommendation based. So there's an algorithm deciding what is recommended for a given user. So, you know, it's doing exactly the same thing of giving a limited number of, you know, things that are most strongly recommended, but it's not in the strict set out program format that you might see on a more traditional program.
This is very much what we might call a playbook format, whereby, as Nick says, we are effectively collating a number of objects or course or items, assets, components of content around a learner's needs. Now, we've had a couple of questions before we move on. EJ LeBlanc is asking if we could provide a link to the Systems Integration Academy. We'll check up on that and come back to you, or email us, and we can find out if we can do that. It was a really nice example, actually, visually, what Nick has been showing, because it is very, very clear, and in terms of the user experience, I felt that it was extremely successful as a learning experience around a particular topic. We had a couple of questions on measurement, Nick, that I thought we could just talk about very quickly. One was from Pat, who said, were the 4 aspects of the measurement?
Yeah, so that they broadly correspond to the Kirkpatrick levels, I think, going from right to left rather than left to right. But yes, you know, the way Kirkpatrick framed them is, you know, broadly correct. I think some of the interpretations of Kirkpatrick have, you know, often been quite happy sheet orientated, and that's been a slight weakness in the application. But we are essentially looking at the same spectrum of, you know, properties of the learning through to impact in the real world. I'm just looking at some of the other questions. We've got questions about what is your preferred back end, and I think that is an interesting question. I don't think we have a preferred back end. I mean, as Andrew introduced, the group of companies, there are all kinds of things that can sit behind an academy. We've got plenty that are built in Moodle, plenty have been built upon the learning experience platforms like Instilled, and we've got ones that are bespoke. Often we find that when we look at the requirements, if we actually start from a blank page and we say what do we want it to do, sometimes it is better to start coding things from scratch to make the experience exactly how you want it.
And there's often a number of reasons beyond the obvious ones why we might be using a certain platform. It may be that our client has that platform within their organization already, or some other reason why we're being encouraged. We're encouraged to develop on the back of something that's already there, rather than starting perhaps from scratch and building ground up. We'll come to some of your other questions later because there's some really interesting ones. Please do keep firing them at us. So point 5 is your alumni are the key to your future. We've talked a little bit about thinking about the future, making sure that your academy is alive, and the importance of the learners as at the kind of heart of that set of stakeholders that you're thinking about in relation to your academy. You need to be driving and telling the stories and driving them into your organization around what's working, and your alumni are the people to do that. You may use your champions and your faculty, and you may market yourself, but ultimately the real power is going to come from the learners themselves. You also need to focus on taking the results, and we've been talking about measurement and broadcasting them. That level of transparency and reporting out to your learners, and and indeed up to your board, to other parts of your organization, is critical. Use your champions to influence your learners as well. And in doing so, in telling the stories throughout your organization, you'll be driving effectively that sort of fear of missing out, and making sure that everybody is understanding where the real value is. So that is the final but important point to make there. Now, in putting together these top tips, we realized very quickly that the corollary of that is that there are some risks, and that we've worked on a number of academy projects over the years that possibly exemplify these. So we wanted to bring them up now and just discuss them. The first one I would put up, that I put up here, is keeping relevance, and making sure that you are, I know I've said it already, but you're keeping an eye on the future and the live existence of your academy. And that means looking closely and challenging yourself as to the relevance of the content at all times. Nick.
And I think the next one for us is the overlap. If you're going to create a new destination, which is your academy, when there's probably already existing destinations in the organization, whether that's a learning management system or other knowledge places, you need to think carefully about the overlap and why that exists, because you don't want to create a situation where, say, your salespeople are coming to the sales academy for their product information and the rest of the organization are getting it somewhere else, because somebody's going to stand back, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, well, there's duplication here, we don't need that. And that's a existential threat, I guess, for an academy.
almost at the other end of this particular problem is Academy becoming, if you like, an ivory tower collection of experts and academics focused on simply delivering top-down content around one area without really paying attention to what's happening in the organization. So linked very, very closely to keeping relevance is making sure you don't become siloed in a particular area and attitude to what you're doing. So keeping an open mind and a link with your audiences, your business needs, other components and offerings within your organization, and drawing on them as you build your offering over time.
And so finally, it's the value perception from your academy. I think if you're running an academy, you need to plan for sustainability. You need to think about how it's going to endure and how it's going to be kept updated. You know, if you've got lots of content on there, then some of it is going to be going out of date at a fairly steady pace. And you need to make sure you stay relevant, particularly if there is a change of strategy in the business. Obviously, you are strategically aligned. If the strategy changes, you need to make sure that you're doing the right levels of realignment of the academy so that you still are the main place. If you become out of date, then at some point somebody's going to say it's time to move on. And I think it's always a disappointment when things move on, because a lot gets thrown away that could have been preserved if things had been kept up to date.
Great, thank you. In a moment, we've got some time to answer your questions. Before we do that, and before we get to our summary, I just wanted to say that Harley will put up a link to that measurement survey into chat. So Harley, if you can do that, that'd be great. We're also very much aware that we've jumped very, very fast around a whole lot of different areas, and this webinar has been about top tips, but we'll be looking closely at diving into some of the other aspects in the future, so there are lots of other resources around things like blended learning and measurement on our website in the resources area. So Harley will hopefully put a link up to that as well. We will be distributing a recording to everybody who's registered on this, and we'll also be here to answer your questions for the next few minutes and after the hour if anybody wants to stay behind and ask further questions. So before we come to those, in summary, our quick jump around our top tips for the Perfect Learning Academy. Define your purpose clearly was our first one, and part of that really was thinking about how your academy is going to evolve in the future and how it's going to grow. Design in measurement, report out, it's critical. We saw in our question to you that many of you are delivering great measurement already, which is very encouraging. So make sure that's part of what you're doing. Focus on clear UX and the optimal blend for your learners. Again, there's so much under the bonnet there, but looking at what your learners need and how they need it, and responding to the different types of learning need now, from the sort of what traditionally would have been just in case to just in time and personalized just for me type learning is critical as well. And then finally, tell the stories of your success and use your alumni and use your learners to make sure that the value is perceived strongly in your organization amongst your learning cohorts. So that's our summary, and we do have time for some questions, which are great before we hit the top of the hour. We had a couple of interesting questions from Claire. One of those was, what are your thoughts on how relevant 70-20-10 is in a virtual world? So I'm in an academy context, important, very. I mean, 70-20-10 is become, you know, sort of foundation phrase. We've always been quite wary of it. It reflects, I think, an idea that learning is very much a mixture of informal, social, and formal in reality. And we are catering always for the different needs of our learners. And so nowadays, a learning academy in a virtual world or in any effectively is clearly going to need to provide what the learners need in all these different areas, ranging from, you know, what Nick showed you in the systems integration academy, which was sort of courses, and indeed the NHS Leadership Academy, which is courses, but many of the others are more like resource areas, hubs for different components of knowledge and so on. Nick, any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that's true. I think the idea of the academy being a place, a live place, you know, has a lot in common with 70-20-10 in principle. That you're not just providing, you know, formalized training that people go through, but you're also stimulating, I guess, the 20 and the 70. So the coaching approaches, and then the just the social collaboration. You know, I think in the early days of 70-20-10, I think people were trying to devise quite complicated technical ways of enabling it. I don't think it needs to be that complicated. I think, you know, the effort still remains on the 10, the formal learning, and the 20 and the 70 can come through, you know, fairly simple technical functions that you'll get with an academy, like making sure that there are discussion forums happening, and having a faculty in place.
Great. One more question before we hit the top of the hour. Rachel asked, how does an LMS integrate with an academy?
I mean, that's a fair question. So an academy, I guess the concept of academy could be realized in lots of different ways, and in its most simplest, it could even be part of your LMS that you just you know, make distinctive and organize, and you say this area of the LMS is the academy. They often can be built on top of an LMS, so there might be another instance of another LMS. What we are seeing is the move towards the use of XAPI to get the reporting. So then it doesn't matter if you've got an LMS and an academy, because both can be sending their data into a record store for you know, the analysis to happen there. So in that case, you wouldn't need to integrate. And I suppose the one other model we see, maybe a little bit less now, is that the LMS remains the place that hosts the courses. So if you've got SCORM courses, they sit on your LMS, and then your academy is a site that's been developed using APIs to talk to the LMS to launch the courses, to understand where that user's progress is at. So there's lots of different technical ways of implementing academy, from things that are, you know, quite simple to things that are really quite bespoke.
Thank you very, very much. And thank you, Rachel, for that question. So it's 1 minute past the hour. I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming today, to Harley, to Hannah in the production office, if you like, and to Nick. Nick and I will stay around for the next 10 minutes or so, and we will be answering some more of your questions. But in the meantime, from me thank you very, very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year with our next beginning of our next series of webinars. Thank you very much.